Because League of Legends is a very competitive game and we care so much about winning, win rate has become the be all end all for statistical analysis when it comes to the game. Obviously, we have access to so much data, so many account profiles and things like that, that people are obsessed with win rate when it comes to comparing players, items, even deciding whether to buff or nerf champions. And what I'm here to say is that while win rate obviously has its place as a statistic, the more that I've learned about League, the more that I've realized that win rate is a completely overrated metric and frankly quite useless in a lot of cases. And just straight up misleading. So I'm going to walk through some account examples on a player-to-player basis. I'm going to walk through some item examples, and then we're going to talk about champion balance as well. And we're going to talk about some ways that win rate can be extremely misleading, and you should know these things so that you don't end up choosing the wrong options or valuing players more or less than you should. So one of the things that really led me to this this discovery or conclusion is that when I keep track of how many ranked games I've played overall across all the seasons, I have this big document where I keep track of that. And one thing that we can see here, something that I found somewhat surprising, is that I have a 51.5% win rate overall in ranked on support on my 11,000 games of support. And then since I've gotten to Diamond, since the first split I got to Diamond, I have a 51.1% win rate. And since I've gotten to Masters, I have a 51.2% win rate. So they're a little bit different. It is a little bit higher down here in the total overall, which makes sense because it's probably an easier rank to improve at or do better at. So it's a little bit higher. But what's really interesting is that all these win rates seem to be converging on 50%. And my question is, does this make me a bad player? Have I improved much too slow at the game? And I was a little bit surprised because I spent so much time stuck between Platinum and Diamond. I was really surprised that my win rate really wasn't much worse than only 0.1% than my progress since I've been in Masters, or even just 0.4% less since I've been playing in general. And these win rates, like I said, tend to trend towards 50%. Another thing that I noticed here when I'm looking at these is that my Braum, which is obviously my best champion because I'm many multiple times more experienced on the champion than anything else, has a lower win rate than my Leona, for example. Even though I am a lot better Braum player than I am a Leona player. What's up with that? And so I think what's going on here is that if you understand how the rank system works, the rank system tries to converge on a rank where you're capable of winning 50% of your games. And so what that means is not that the rank system is trying to keep you stuck at a rank where you win 50%. The rank is flexible. So maybe where you're currently at as a player, when I first started playing League, now I'm Challenger or was Challenger a couple of months ago. When I first started playing League, I was in Bronze 3. That was the rank where I was capable of winning 50% of my games at. But then what happened? As I started to get better and better at the game, as I started to learn what the champions did, I moved from Bronze 3 slowly and gradually up to Bronze 2, to Bronze 1, to Silver 4. Now I'm capable of winning 50% of my games at Silver 4. Maybe I get stuck in Silver 4 for a little bit, but then I have a breakthrough, I make some improvement, and now I'm Silver 3, Silver 2, Silver 1. So it's not that you're stuck at a 50% win rate. It's that it's trying to put you at a rank where you're capable of winning 50%, which means that if you're winning too much, your games will get harder. And if you're losing too much, your games will get easier. But again, not in a rigged sort of way. They'll get harder or easier as your rank goes up or down. So while your games are getting harder, they're getting harder, but you're being rewarded with a higher rank. It's not like your games are getting harder in the same rank that you're currently in. So this is something that people are obviously very, they get very picky about this. They're very on edge about this. So I wanted to clarify that to be clear. But the point is that your rank will converge on a 50% win rate, which means that when you start playing ranked, maybe if you could start in one of two places really, or I guess three. You could start being much better than the rank that you were placed in. Unlucky, small sample size of games, they placed you a little bit low. This is actually ideal because you'll be at a rank where your games are fairly easy and you'll win 55% of your games right off the bat, climbing up for a little while until you get to the rank that maybe you should have been placed at. This is actually ideal because players are going to prefer and enjoy more, even if it's a little bit of a slower climb. They're going to enjoy winning 55% of their games and making progress over time, seeing a new division every month or so, or going up and up and up and up. And consistently finishing higher every year. That's an enjoyable climb. It's actually unfortunate if you get placed too high, because if you get placed too high, your experience is going to be losing a lot of games. Hopefully not for the long term, but you're going to lose a lot of games and then go down to a rank that you are able to win 50% at. And that's a pretty miserable experience that leads to people quitting the game. But regardless, your ranked win rate, the more games you play, is going to converge at 50%, or it's going to approach 50%, because the more ranked games you put in, the more accurate your rank is going to be. So what happens here is the same thing that happens on an individual champion level to a certain extent, but it's also true of ranked in general. The more games you play, the closer your win rate will be to 50%, because the more games the system has to see from you, the more data it has to push you to the correct rank. So the fact that I've maintained over a huge number of games, like 11,000, a 51.5% win rate, we can kind of break this down and think of it more like this. 50% win rate is the win rate that my rank is going to naturally converge to, no matter how good or bad I am at the game. The fact that over a large number of games, I've managed to win 51.5% of my games suggests to me that the 1.5% extra that I'm getting, and we consistently see even in bad times for me, or in ranks where it's maybe harder to climb at, I'm consistently seeing about this 1% extra win rate differential over other players. Now, what is that? That is essentially my rate of improvement. That means that during the entire time I've been playing ranked, I've won an extra 1.5% of games than I was expected, despite my rank constantly going up and constantly adjusting to where I should only be winning 50%, because I'm constantly improving. So maybe every 100 games I play, I get good enough to win an extra 1.5% of my games, which is an extra 1.5 game per 100. So I end up swinging the tides despite my rank going to a certain place. I end up swinging the tides an extra 1.5 games than is expected every single 100 games that I play. So that's something that you have to understand. What this means is that you can have an account that has a very, very high win rate, but if there's a very low number of games played, it just hasn't converged to 50% yet. This is one of the reasons why when you look at accounts of people who are grinding lots of games and have lots of experience, like I have with this account, when you look at players who have played like 1,000 games in a season, well, their win rate's probably not going to be 60%. And the reason why it's not 60% is because they're probably on their main account instead of a Smurf, so they didn't get all these free wins through lower ranks that are inflating their win rate. They didn't get the benefit of, playing a limited number of games where they were maybe extremely focused and locked in for the few games that they played. They didn't get the benefit of, going through this climbing process where they weren't quite at their rank yet. And so because they played so many games, they were at an accurate rank to their peak, maybe even sometimes going a little bit higher, or sometimes a little bit lower, but they were pretty much always staying at an accurate rank to their peak the entire time. So if you have a player who's playing at their peak, or playing at their main rank the entire time, of course they're going to have a lower win rate. Of course their win rate's going to be similar to 50%. It really doesn't matter. So do not beat yourself up about having a 50% win rate. And don't beat yourself up about having a 51 or a 52% win rate. A 51 or a 52% win rate is standard over a large number of games. Also understand that you could have maybe a higher win rate or a lower win rate over a lower number of games. But as you get, a certain number of games played, you really should hopefully have a 51 or a 52 or higher percent win rate. So one of the things that we see with that is in Champions 2, I mentioned that, for example, my Braum has a much lower win rate than my Leona, even though I'm obviously a much better Braum player. So why is that? Well, the reason for it is that even though this is a pretty decent chunk of games on Leona, I've just played a lot more games on Braum than I have on Leona. I also played a lot of Leona games. She was my main champion in Season 3 and Season 4 when I was climbing through Bronze and Silver, where the improvement and getting better than the other players at those ranks came easier than at any other rank that I've been at, because it's just learning the basics of the game. So when we get into the more complicated details of it, to be honest, we could kind of think about this in a different way. Do you know how this is broken down into my total since I got to Diamond and since I got to Masters? What if instead of total, this said the time I was Bronze to the time I was Diamond for the first time, or like when I got to, there was an Emerald at the time, so when I got to Plat. Well, if this said that instead, we could assume that my win rate here would be even higher, because we know that I have a lower win rate since getting to Diamond. So if we were excluding all the Diamond Plus games at a 51.1% win rate, if we excluded those games from this win rate would be even higher, because this is pulling this down by being a part of this sample. So essentially what I'm getting at here is that I probably had maybe even a 52% win rate or something like that through those time periods, and then a 51% win rate since getting to Diamond. I think that the rate of improvement comes easier at those lower ranks, where passing a bunch of players doesn't really take a whole lot, and then it gets harder and slows down as you go up. So this doesn't really suggest to me that my Leona is better than my Braum. What it tells me with the context I have is that I improved on Leona at a time when I was playing some easier games, when I was probably placed a little bit lower than I should have been to start out ranked, and when I was making that easy progress. And also, I just have less games. Even though it's still 911 games, which is a ton, it's still a lot less games than my Braum, so it hasn't had the same sort of time and number of games played to converge on a 50% win rate. Let's look at some other things that happen here with champion win rates. Your champion win rates in the beginning are kind of at extremes. You'll either be winning 100% or you'll be winning 0%. And so you'll see very, very good win rates or very bad win rates at low numbers of games. But as we start to get into, like, when you've only played a champion like 7 to 20 times, and this is going to depend on the individual. Some people are going to click really well with a champion. Other people are going to take longer to learn the champion. Some people are going to start by randomly first timing the champion without putting any research into it because they felt like it was good in the draft. Other people are going to, decide that they're intentionally practicing this champion, put an item set together, put runes together, and then start their first game on the champion, and you're going to have a much higher success rate that way. But we can see that for me individually as a player, I'm pretty consistently not able to win anywhere near 40 or 50% of my games when I've only played 7 to 20 games on a champion. Then when I get to about 20 games on the champion, there are some champions that maybe I'm having a pretty decent success on, or, at least on most champions, I'm starting to win 40% of my games. So my win rate starts climbing, not only because I'm getting better at the champion, but because my rank probably went down when I was first starting to play it. Now my win rate is converging on 50%. So now all of a sudden we get to, 50 or 100 games played, and now I'm very close to 50% over, on almost every champion that I play, above 100 or 200 games played, with some exceptions. And I've been having a tough time on certain champions, but regardless, that's about how it goes. One of the other things that's really crucial to understand about win rate is whether you're playing a champion at your peak or playing a champion when you're lower. So for example, something I've really experienced recently is I've been playing a lot of games on Nautilus, and I've been losing my games on Nautilus, and then I'll go play a different champion. I was working on improving my champion pool, and we'll get into this. So I would lose a bunch of games on Nautilus, and then I'd go play Lulu, or I'd go play Janna or something like that, and then I'd win. And so what was happening there is, normally if you were just focusing on one champion, like just Nautilus, when I lose and my games get easier for my Nautilus, they would be easier for my Nautilus because my rank has gone down and now it's easier for me to win my next game on Nautilus. But what's happening is I'm stealing that easy game and putting it on Janna. So now all of a sudden I've lost this game on Nautilus that I did poorly in. And instead of my next Nautilus game being easier, instead I just went and won a game on Jana. And now my next Nautilus game is just as hard because I'm back at the same MMR. So what can happen here, and usually this is not such an extreme effect because you don't see that happening. Imagine a player, this happens all the time, who has an account deranked to Iron 4. They go 0 and 100. But then the player comes in and starts playing Teemo, their main champion, and they win 99 out of their first 100 games. Does that really mean that that guy is this amazing, incredible Teemo player? Or was it actually the result of tanking on 100 games on another champion that allowed the player to be able to win so many games in a row on Teemo? You see what I'm saying? So essentially what can happen here is sometimes I can, lose a bunch of games on Nautilus and then swing in and play Braum when I'm getting too low. And now my Braum win rate is a little bit inflated and my Nautilus win rate is a little bit deflated. Sometimes I'll play my Braum when I'm stuck at my peak and I'm trying to break through and make progress and I'm trying my hardest at my peak rank. So I'll be spamming Braum. So my Braum win rate is going to be a little bit underinflated, a little bit deflated because I'm playing Braum when I'm constantly stuck at my peak, but I'm not spamming games on Jana when I'm stuck at my peak. So my Jana win rate is really more reflective of how I played Jana at 80 LP, whereas my Braum win rate is more reflective at how I played Braum from 400 LP to 665 LP. So what we can see here is that champions can essentially steal win rate from each other, right? You can lose a bunch of games. Imagine you tried a new champion like, same thing happened here. You try Maokai's support and you do terrible on it and discover that it's not that good. But then you switch to playing Jana and you put your 20 games in on Jana, and now because you're 100 or 200 LP lower, your Jana games are easier. And so maybe you're able to squeak out a 50% win rate on Jana that you wouldn't have been able to squeak out if it wasn't for losing all these games on Maokai. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, but maybe I wouldn't perform as well on Jana 100 or 200 LP higher. So what you have to understand is that your win rates are partially a byproduct of whether you're playing that champion at your peak or whether you're playing that champion when you're lower than your peak. So if you pick a champion at all of your low points, in theory, it should be easier to win with that champion because the games are lower and easier. And if you pick a champion, that you main, that you're constantly playing at your peak, and when you're hard stuck, that's going to deflate the win rate on the champion. So 2 things about this real quick. Number 1, this is off topic, but don't pick a champion that you're bad at when you're going down, right? I'm doing this specifically because I'm trying to work on expanding my champion pool, trying to put 20 games into a bunch of different champions for support so that I can showcase that I can play and win a decent number of games on a bunch of different support champions. But I have had experiences in the past where I've been in Diamond 4 and I've been hard stuck and I've given up on my main champion and I've switched to playing a champion I'm not as comfortable with and not as familiar with. And then it's just been disastrous, right? It's led to me stagnating and declining even more than if I had just tried to continue working on my main champion and find a breakthrough. So when you're stuck at your peak, you need to give your best, right? You need to figure out, I'm stuck at my peak because the way that I'm playing Braum is not good enough to get to the next level. I need to play Braum in order to get my Braum good enough to get to the next level. If I go to playing Jana, who I'm maybe 200, 300 LP worse at, then, or 3 or 4 divisions or rank worse at Jana, if I go to playing Jana when I'm already stuck and struggling at my peak, I'm only going to immediately start losing and going down from my peak. So don't, or even if you've gone down and you're on a huge decline, even then you're much more likely to be successful and bounce back by playing your main champion. So do not do this, right? I'm specifically trying to practice champions for teams and stuff like that. Do not try this at home. But the point is here is that your win rate can essentially be transferred from one champion to another. So it matters a lot whether you're playing that champion when you're at a lower rank or a higher rank or what. So sometimes there are champions that you've played a lot when you were at a lower rank in the past, or you played them consistently when you go on a demotion streak and you always bounce back on this champion. And so it's got a bit of an inflated win rate. Maybe you have your main champion and you're thinking to yourself, well, I have a 60% win rate on my second most played champion, but I have a 50% win rate on my main champion. I've got 10 times as much experience on my main champion, but maybe the fact that I have a 60% win rate on my second most played champion, even though I don't have very many games on them, suggests to me that I should quit my main champion and play my second most played champion. A lot of times that'll be a mistake, because actually, even though you have a 60% win rate on your second most played champion, you're so inexperienced at it. And the reason why you have that is because you're picking it in specific situations where it's good for the champion. It's not your generic pick. One of the reasons why I'm struggling with Nautilus a little bit is I've just been blind picking Nautilus while working on these other champions and picking Janna and Lulu and stuff like that in situations that are good for it. As a result, Nautilus is getting all the bad games, and it's tanking my win rate on Nautilus, and now I have to work on fixing that as well. So maybe now we give Nautilus some preferential treatment and see what happens there. But don't be fooled into switching away from your main champion. So this is number one, is that your win rates are going to converge on 50%, whether it's your whole win rate in ranked or whether it's your champion win rate. The more games you play on the champion, because the more games you put in, the closer you're going to be to being stuck at your peak and spamming games while you're learning and stuck at your peak. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So here I have an example of a master 30 LP player with a 54% win rate who's 70 and 60. And then I have my account, and again, I'm working on a lot of different champions right now. There's not much Braum in sight, but I'm currently sitting at a very ugly 49% win rate, the dreaded 49% win rate in ranked. So I ask you this question. You get into a low master game. You have me, Masters 84 LP, and this guy, Masters 30 LP. Who do you want on your team? Because I see people arguing this all the time. And I swear I'm not just saying this or making this because of my experience recently, but people say this all the time. They say, oh, this guy on my team has a 49% win rate. We lost. Or this guy on my team has a 65% win rate. He's a Smurf. It's a free win. So we have the example comparison here. Would you rather have this guy with a 54% win rate on a Smurf, by the way, 55 games played, or would you rather have me with a 49% win rate? The objective true answer is that at least as long as I'm picking, now this is a little bit different because I'm not picking Braum, but at least if I'm willing to pick Braum at the same ratio that got me to this rank in the first place. So I picked Braum, I don't know what the exact ratio is here, but maybe I pick Braum 5 times out of 10, and then 1 time out of 10, I'm picking Nautilus, 1 time out of 10, I'm picking Lulu or something like that. And then another 3 out of 10 or some mix of these other ones, right? If I'm willing to pick champions at the same ratio, or you don't know what champions I'm willing to pick, right? When we get into select, you'd much rather have me not knowing what champion I'm going to pick. So barring the fact that I'm obviously a unique case here because I'm picking different champions, you'd rather have me, and here's why. Even though I have a 49% win rate, who do I have a 49% win rate versus? I have a 49% win rate versus Master 400 LP players and versus players who were 500 or 600 LP when I was Challenger a couple of months ago. That's where I'm losing games and going down to even get to the point where I'm at Masters 84 LP. To go from 665 LP to Masters 84 LP, means that I lost my games versus players who are higher than where we're at now. So I was higher and I'm coming down. I've obviously proven that I'm able to consistently finish 400 LP, and for the first time that I was able to get to 600 LP and get to Challenger. So as long as we don't know what I'm going to pick, or especially if we say I'm going to pick my main champion, then it would be even more preferable because my win rate would be even better. You would want this player with a proven history and a lot of games of experience. Here's why. This player, while they do have a 54% win rate, has very clearly plateaued. So if we take a closer look at this account peaked at 179 LP and is now down to 30. In their last 80 games, they're 39 and 41, so they're stuck at a 49% win rate. They clearly aren't capable of going higher than Master 179 LP or wherever, somewhere in this range, kind of low master player. Now, maybe because of their champion pool, right, if they were willing to stick to certain champions, I assume this player is practicing on this account. It looks like they're putting games into a bunch of different champions like I am. So maybe if this guy's main champion happens to be, I don't know, Smolder or Corky or something like that, if this guy all of a sudden decided that he's sick of being stuck on the account and instead of practicing champions, he wants to just play his main champion, Corky or something like that, maybe the account could go higher. So I don't really know if this player isn't capable of getting to 300, 400 LP or whatever. Maybe he is on one champion in the same way that I'm probably capable of getting to Challenger on Braum. But we don't know that. So not knowing what's going on with the champion pools for both of these players, would you rather have a player who peaked 179 LP and is plateaued, or a player who peaked 665 LP? It has more to do with where you were peaking, where you were coming from, and at what difficulty you played the games at. So if I won 49% of my games at a much higher difficulty, and this guy won 54% of his games, including through silver and gold, I would much rather have the player that won 49% of their games against Challenger and GM players than the player who won 54% of their games against silver, gold. To be fair, he didn't win, only 54% of his games, but between silver and masters. Would you rather have the player who's winning 49% of their games between Challenger and Masters, or the guy who's winning 54% between Gold and Masters? Much rather have the 49% win rate player. So it's deceptive. It's very, very deceptive. Okay, so another thing here. Here's an example of a Smurf account that is very clearly not peaked that I've found here and pulled up. So this guy has a 73% win rate, but in his last 20 games, he's still at an 80% win rate. So this guy is 160 LP. He did peak at 183 LP, but that's only one game off of where he's currently at now. So obviously this player is very clearly still on the up and up. He's still winning a ton of games. His win rate is still as high or higher than his win rate overall. And so this guy is very clearly capable of getting higher than 200 LP. Probably, to be honest, looking at an account like this, the guy might actually be capable of just being a Challenger player, probably as a Challenger Smurf. Another big thing I think we talked about is think about just from this perspective for a second. The odds when you have this player who's winning 60-70% of their games, because with this player, if you take away the 39 and 41, remember that this player was 31 and 19, which is a 65% win rate. They were 31 and 19 before their last 80 games. So when this account came into Masters 0 OP and they were sitting at a 65% win rate, a lot of people would have said to themselves, yeah, well, I get that you were coming from a higher rank and stuff like that, but this guy has a 65% win rate. Forget about 54%. This guy came into Masters, was about the same rank with a 65% win rate. Well, odds are that this player is a high diamond player or a low master player because there's so many more players in high diamond and low masters than there are that are GM or Challenger capable players, that chances are that this guy is more likely to be a high diamond or a master player, low master player, than he is to be a Challenger or GM player. Whereas with me, that I actually am capable of hitting Challenger and GM multiple times. So big difference there, even if the account has a 65% win rate. Now this account, sky's the limit, right? Who knows what's going to happen with this account? Maybe it'll plateau soon. Maybe that's absolutely not going to happen to this account. Really quite hard to say. Obviously for now, the account has a very high win rate. It's totally possible that this account is Challenger, but the same logic applies. It's also very possible that this guy is like, a 300 LP player. I mean, you just don't know because you don't have enough sample size of games. He's lost these two. Potentially, he could be peaking right now, but we only have the last 5 games to go off of. So in his last 5 games, he's only won 60% or something like that. Perhaps if he loses his next game, he'll be looking at 50% on his last 6 games. It's a very low sample size, so it's very hard to say. But it could be that this guy is starting to peak for the first time. And it could be that even with a player like this, it could absolutely be the case that this guy ends up peaking at 200 or 300 LP, and then same thing happens to him as this guy. In fact, maybe the only difference between this guy and this guy is that this guy entered Masters with a 65% win rate, and this guy entered Masters with a 73% win rate. So maybe this guy was just slightly better, or was just slightly better at beating gold, platinum players or whatever, and maybe they'll both end up peaking relatively soon, or one already has. But you get the idea. So comparing players only based on win rate while ignoring the context of, were they playing on a Smurf account and so a bunch of their games were in gold through Masters? Were they, higher rank before? And so their games were actually versus like GM and Challenger players. Are they maybe capable of winning a certain number of games or at a certain rank very easily on a certain set of champions, but not on another set of champions because they're just practicing champions or playing different stuff? Big difference between my account and this account and even this account is that you can see that I'm intentionally trying to practice a bunch of different champions right now. This looks like it is probably literally a practice account meant to, that has been grinded to Masters with the intention of practicing different champions because you have so many different unique champions being played. One of the advantages that this Pike account has is that this Pike is intentionally just playing a very small set of champions, pretty much exclusively playing Pike. I mean, it's impressive that he's playing Kindred and Syndra and playing 3 different roles here as well is a little bit impressive, right? But I mean, we immediately fall off to as little as 1 game played on his 4th, 5th, and 6th most played champion. So this guy is really limiting his champion pool in a way that's going to inflate his win rate a little bit in the short term, compared to this player. Again, had this player only played Corki or only played Smolder or something like that, if those are his best champions, I don't know, the entire time he was climbing on this account, instead of learning Cassiopeia and Rise, who he obviously struggled with a little bit, maybe this guy would have climbed with, instead of a 65% win rate, that could have been the difference between, if he was just one-tricking Corki, maybe he would have climbed at 77% or 73%. And then maybe the players end up getting stuck at the same spot. It's really hard to compare players without contextualizing the rank that they're playing the games at, how many games they're playing, right? That's another big thing we've just talked about. I've played nearly a little bit over 800 games, like 818 games, which is a lot. Whereas these Smurf accounts have only played 130. This one hasn't even played that many yet. It's, played like 80 games or something like that. So when you've played 800 games, as we just talked about, most of the games that you're playing are going to be at your peak rank or at a pretty high rank for you, at least not that far below where you're at and capable of playing at. And so the games are going to be much harder. So someone with more games played is going to necessarily have a win rate closer to 50%. Now, you would hope, right, again, 51%, seeing a little bit of improvement would be very good. Obviously, we don't see that with my account, so that might be concerning. Hey, this player's playing a ton of games and they haven't improved. But is that really even true? So, for example, have I not improved as a player by putting in all these games on all these different champions I don't normally play? I don't think so. I think that everyone that I would ever talk to on any team or anything like that would say that the fact that I've put in all these games on all these different champions makes me an infinitely more versatile and better player than had I just spent even the same number of games continuing to play Braum. So these games have actually made me a much better player, including my 35% win rate on Maokai and other champions that I failed to do as well on. These games have all made me a better player, not a worse player, despite it decreasing my win rate. So, that's sort of an interesting contradiction there. I think I've made more improvement as a player by getting to a point where I'm capable of playing 6, 7, different champions at once right now, than, I was when I was just playing Braum. So I actually don't even agree with the concept that my rate of improvement has really suffered as a result. I think what happens is that I switch back to playing Braum, and I obviously am going to win a bunch of games, this will turn positive, and all of a sudden I'm going to have that, 51, 52% win rate again. All it takes is for me to play a more comfortable champion, or to continue getting better at these champions I'm currently practicing. So that's the reality of the situation. I wouldn't even say it necessarily makes me a worse player. So context matters a lot. So that's it as far as the individual player accounts. Then let's talk about some pitfalls when it comes to, looking at win rates for items, summoner spells, that sort of thing. So here we have like a situation, and I'll be going into a different video in depth on how to do some math to help you figure out the differences between these two. But one of the things that's really tough here is we have this situation where we have Ignite is the most common choice here on Braum, and Heal is the second most common choice. But Heal has a higher win rate, but Ignite's got a lot more games played. So there's something to be said for the fact that it's the most popular choice. And so we see something really interesting happen with summoner spells and items as well, which is also that the more games are put onto an item or a summoner spell or whatever, the more their win rate converges at 50%. So let's see if we can find some really clear examples here. Maybe Braum's not even the best one. Let's take a look at like a Lulu or something like that and see how her items are looking. So for example, we have items on Lulu like Moonstone. Moonstone's got a 55% win rate. It's the most popular item here as the second item on Lulu, but Redemption has a 56.75% win rate, but 3 times less games played than Moonstone. So how do we know which one is better? There are really people who are going to do two different things, and I think that it's too rigid. There are going to be people who will say, well, the most popular choice is Moonstone, therefore Moonstone is good. Then there are going to be people who will say, well, Redemption has a higher win rate, therefore Redemption's the best. And these are really simplistic ways, obviously, of looking at what items should actually be built based on their data that we have available. Because obviously what matters in some cases a lot more than win rate, or at least in conjunction with win rate, is really the number of games played matters a lot. So you can't look at it one way or another because, of course, the pick rate matters a lot. If people really think that Moonstone is significantly better, then why do these other items have a 56 or a 57% win rate? A lot of the time it's because they're being built less frequently, so their win rate is being less pulled down to 50%, and because they're able to be built in situations where they're good rather than being built every single game. And when they're being built every single game by every single player, including players who aren't very familiar with the champion but know that this is a core item for the champion, they're likely to have a lower win rate for a lot of reasons, because there's more games played, which converges at 50%, because there's more people who aren't good at the champion picking these items instead of picking niche items that might be better in that certain slot, etc. You also run into big pitfalls like remembering that items have synergies and combinations with each other that work better. So a really great example of this is a champion like Karma, who has two really distinct builds, two different types of builds. One build that Karma has is her Enchanter build, which is Moonstone and Redemption and then Dawncore here. But she also has an AP build where she goes Malignance and Imperial Mandate and Shurelya's. Now, luckily, it's all lining up nicely right now, but there was a point when maybe Moonstone was the most common first item, but Imperial Mandate was the most common second item. But you would never go Moonstone Imperial Mandate because these items don't synergize well with each other, because if you understand what's actually going on, they're part of two separate builds. So you need to make sure, obviously, that you're following one build or the other because they synergize with each other, rather than mixing the items just because they're the most popular or, or something like that. So you've got a whole lot of stuff going on here, right? You can have the number of games played means that the item has a lower win rate, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's worse. You can have items that are built in niche situations like Magi's is a really obvious example where you're more likely to build Magi's if you're winning, and so it has a higher win rate, but it doesn't mean it's generically good. Braum has the same thing, or tank supports have the same thing with Knight's Vow. So let's take a look at this situation. Knight's Vow has a 55% win rate. Locket has a 53% win rate. But more people by far choose to build Locket first instead of Knight's Vow. Why is that? Well, Knight's Vow is an item that you benefit more from. You get more healing, and it's more important to protect somebody if your teammate is fed. Because if your teammate's fed, they're doing more damage per damage that they're taking, and it's more important to protect them. So Knight's Vow becomes a really good first item if your AD carry is so fed out of their mind in lane that you're just absolutely blowing them out of the water and winning the game. Otherwise, you're in 95% of games, you're just going to go Locket first because your AD carry is not so far ahead that you would gamble on building towards Knight's Vow's build path. You wouldn't commit into the Chain Vest part of Knight's Vow without knowing whether that's the case yet or not. Even if your AD carry is 2-0 or 3-0, you're not ahead enough that you would be certain that you're willing to go Knight's Vow first. So you only go Knight's Vow first if you're very, very likely to win. So Knight's Vow tends to have an inflated win rate because of that, and more people choose to build Locket. But if you were just looking at the win rate, you might decide that Knight's Vow is generically better as a first item than Locket. Or even if you take sample size into consideration, you may say, well, 11,000 games is a lot of games, so Knight's Vow is just generically better than Locket. But it's really not, right? You have to understand the context, the situations in which they're being built, the number of games that are being played, etc., just like kind of contextualizing players' win rates. The other thing is you've got to keep in mind, especially with items, things like cost, right? So Locket is 2,200 gold, but Knight's Vow is 2,300 gold. Let's see if we can find a little bit of an expensive item. We got Frozen Heart here is like 2,500, but one of the things you got to keep in mind is that this isn't taking into account how much gold these items cost. So another reason is that if Knight's Vow is 100 gold more expensive than Locket, it means that you have an extra 100 gold versus that player who completes Locket. So that also means that you're probably further ahead and more likely to be winning if you're able to complete it. We see this effect here with just the fact that almost every item that you make it to at item number 4 has a huge win rate compared to your item number 1. If you make it to item number 4 on support, which is really your third item, not including the support item and boots, if you make it to item number 4, you're winning 60+% of your games. Well, the reason for that is because you're likely to be on real item number 3, and your opponent's still on item number 2. And so if your opponent's on item number 2, they're more likely to lose. And if you're on item number 3, you're more likely to win because you're further ahead. So their game is more likely to end while they're at 2 items and don't have a third completed. And you're more likely to win while having a third item completed before they get theirs done. So we can see that same concept playing out there. It's not that your win rate goes up more by getting your 4th item. It's more of a product of the fact that it must mean that you're ahead, that you have so much gold that you're able to complete this many items. So it's not that you're necessarily more likely to win if you, it's not that the item is giving you a much better chance of winning. It's that the win rate is telling you that the fact that you have that much gold means that you're likely to win, if that makes sense. It's not the item doing it itself. So it's not like jumping from item 2 to item 3 automatically, completing, maybe if I skip boots and complete redemption 3rd or something like that, I'm going to have this insane 65% chance of winning every game. It's not like that, right? The item's not doing it. It's the gold in general that's telling you in the win rate that that's what's happening. So a lot of things like that can be very deceptive when it comes to items, because you don't necessarily just want to build the most popular, because what if the most popular is wrong? I mean, people can be wrong in mass about what they're picking, but you don't want to necessarily pick the highest win rate either, because the highest win rate is going to be influenced by things like, oh, well, this thing has a higher win rate because it's higher cost, or this thing has a higher win rate because it's built in niche situations where the item is very strong, or it has a high win rate because there aren't very many games played on it and it's completely trash, like Wits End on Braum. But because it's only been built 6 times, right, it ends up having a high win rate. But people fall into this trap all the time. I mean, for example, you might say, well, 123 games isn't that bad, and Warmogs has a 57% win rate still, so maybe I build it first on Braum. But, it's super low sample size. It's super expensive compared to Locket and Knight's Vow, which means you're further ahead in gold to be able to complete it here. And more likely to be winning because of that. But the item itself is obviously objectively terrible when we start to think about the stats and how much it costs and what we're getting, and whether, the fact that we don't get the passive activated and all this stuff. So there's a lot to consider when it comes to items, and you really need to use statistics as one benchmark. You need to use win rate and games played and, people choosing to build that and different build paths as one thing to help you think about it. But you also need to contextualize, okay, well, what am I getting for the gold? How much stats is it giving? Do I like this item on my champion? Does it synergize well with my champion's abilities? So you're going to do what you would normally do, and you're going to use the data to supplement your decision or your choices, not only build based off of the data. That being said, if you're a player who's newer to the game, I've always said you should probably go with the most commonly built things. You should focus on learning the game, focus on the details of your gameplay, and we can come back to builds and itemization at a deeper level when we understand more about what's going on with the game. And you can make those decisions better on your own, because it is complicated to make the right choices when you're building items to that level of precision. So you are better off, for the most part, following what people generically do. So for example, if you came in on Braum and you just built what most people do, and you build plated steel caps and Locket and Knight's Vow, that's great, and you're going to be in a pretty good spot, and it takes you 2 seconds to find that that's the most common build path on Braum, and there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. Now, if you understand Braum at a deeper level, you're going to understand, okay, some games maybe I'm going plated steel caps, some games I'm going mercury treads, some games I'm going boots of swiftness. Some games I'm going Knight's Vow first instead of Locket because we're really far ahead in bot lane and we can kind of secure the game with this. And some games, most games we're going to be sitting on Locket first. Second item, we're pretty much always building Knight's Vow no matter what. We shouldn't be actually upgrading Thornmail. We should be sitting on Bramble and then going into a different item because Bramble gives you what you want out of the item in the anti-heal for a significantly cheaper cost than upgrading Thornmail. So what you get for the gold value of upgrading Bramble to Thornmail isn't worth it, and you're better off building into another item like Rookern and sitting on Bramble, or you're better off, if you don't need the anti-heal, just going Rookern as a third item instead. So you'll understand those things at a deeper level when you understand the game a little bit better, and you can use that win rate data and stuff like that to help supplement that. But it is not the be all end all of understanding the game, right? You got a lot of contradictions here when it comes to the itemization stuff and the win rates that will make things very confusing for you if you don't understand that there are all of these variables and factors affecting things. Now let's take a look at champion win rates and stuff like that and think about how this may be an area where things are misunderstood. I've been saying for a long time, but we're going to take a look at Braum as an example, that one tricks can increase the win rate of a champion in general. So if we look at all of the highest win rate champions in general, whether it's support or maybe another role, let's see if we can find kind of some of those weird ones. So like Quinn mid, for example, has a very high win rate. Do I think Quinn mid is broken? Absolutely not. Why do I think Quinn mid is not broken? The reason why I don't think Quinn mid is broken is because it has a very low pick rate, one of the lowest in mid lane. We can actually find it here. It's the 5th lowest in mid lane at 0.67%. Let me scroll down a little bit so you can see that. 0.67%. This is the same problem we had here of maybe I have a champion like Malphite that I'm winning 53% of my games on, but I've only played 54 games. So the thing is that that's not necessarily saying that I'm going to be this amazing Malphite player. really what it's telling me is that, and with Malphite, actually what it's telling us is Malphite's a fairly easy champion to learn, to be honest. But one of the things it could be telling us, if let's say it's a champion not like Malphite, let's take a look at another one. I have a better example here. Let's look at like Kale and Volibear. Kale and Volibear are champions that I have pretty high win rates on. These are from a long time ago, both support actually. So this was the old Volibear in support and the old Kale in support during the Ardent meta, right? So here's the issue. My win rate on Kale and my win rate on Volibear at 60+% is not really reflective of the fact that these are good support champions or easy to learn or that I'm particularly good at them. It's a reflection of the fact that, well, I only played 20 games on the champion at points where they were particularly strong. Not really Volibear, but Kale, as weird as that sounds, I mean, the Ardent meta was so broken that if you didn't have something to pick, or if you picked any champion with a decent heal, at the time, Kale, her old Q was a targeted point and click slow, her W was a big heal and movement speed boost, and her ult, similar to now, made her teammate invulnerable for a period of time. The only ability that she had that wasn't super viable as a support was her E, and even with her E at the time, you'd activate it and then your auto attacks became ranged for a duration, and you could use that to poke and do a little bit of range trading on support. It is just one, sort of damaging ability or poke exclusive ability. Nothing really wrong with that kit for a support. Now it's different nowadays because you don't get access to the range auto attacks for a very long time. Until you're much higher level. So Kale nowadays, since the rework, is not viable in support, and also this was that time when the Ardent meta existed, which made Kale's W a lot stronger on support with that item than it would ever be today, and so Kale support's just not really viable anymore. But regardless, the point is, there were a very specific meta that allowed me to get this win rate on Kale and a very small sample size of games. Same thing's happening here with Quinn. Quinn has a very small sample size of games, and so her win rate is higher because she happens to be higher in this case. It's probably partially higher because of just such a low sample size of games. The other thing is the people who are playing Quinn mid are much more likely to be Quinn one tricks, most likely, than just random people deciding to play Quinn mid, because she's not a very popular champion because she has such a low pick rate. So because she has such a low pick rate, the people who are playing it are probably, and we know that Quinn is kind of a one-tricked type champion, it's going to be a very niche set of players that are playing it, and those players are probably pretty good relative to their rank and working on progressing and climbing through ranked. And so this is more of a reflection of the fact that Quinn is mained by a small percentage of players picked in very few games, and over that small sample size of games on this patch, she happens to have a very high win rate in mid. Now, at some points, Riot has disputed this by saying that there are enough new players coming in that they offset the effect that one tricks have on win rate. But I've disagreed with that, and one of the reasons why I've disagreed with that is because it depends on the champion. For a champion like Quinn, I doubt there's a lot of new players who are coming in and first timing Quinn mid enough to offset the one tricks with such a low pick rate. It's just not the reality. And just because there are new players coming in to offset what the one tricks are doing doesn't mean that the effect that the one tricks are having isn't still there and isn't still present in the win rate. It just depends. So I think that that's an issue that I have with that, although I'd have to see more data on that, obviously. So what I actually wanted to talk about here with champion win rates is we have a champion like Braum. So we've got another sample size issue. You'll converge at 50% again, like we've been talking about. But we also have what's going on with Braum right now. If we look at Braum's patch history and his win rate, you can see that Braum has shot up in popularity. He went from a champion that was being picked 1 or 2% of the time to a champion that's being picked 8% of the time here, 8.23%. And a champion that had a 50% win rate to a 52.3% win rate. And his ban rate, which was usually like 1% or something like that, has shot all the way up to 13.8%. So what's happening with Braum? Why is Braum broken right now? Well, if we look at his patch history, we can see that using his W has a forgiveness radius of 175 units. That just means if your cursor is a little bit too far away from your ally by 175 units or less, it'll count as hovering over your ally. So it's just making your ally's hitbox essentially a little bit bigger for Wing to them. This was never going to affect anyone who was good at the champion or had good mouse control anyways. So this is a really minor change. 14.9 stats selection radius increased from 130 units to 100. I gotta be honest, I don't really know what this means. I don't even remember reading this, but I'm assured that it doesn't have anything to do really with gameplay. This may be for like, I mean, I don't really know. It could even be as simple as like leveling up an ability or something. The box is like a little bit bigger. I mean, this is really not related to gameplay. So the last significant change that he received was that his base mana regen was increased to 7 from 6. And this is a big one. The minimum knockup duration on his ult was increased to 0.6 seconds from 0.3. So they doubled the minimum knockup duration for Braum ult, which is kind of important. So that was all the way back in season 13 or towards the end of season 13. So this was over a year and a half ago. And we know that Braum has become relevant and prevalent and maybe overpowered in the past couple of patches, not, a year and a half ago. So what happened to Braum going from a low pick rate and a 50% win rate to a 52, 53% win rate and a high pick rate, and he is getting nerfed a little bit on the next patch, doesn't really have anything to do with Braum as a champion. It has to do with the meta of other champions around him. And my conclusion that I've come to after talking about this with a couple of people is that it has to do with the 80 carry meta right now, with Yuntal becoming a must-have on almost every 80 carry, and champions that build Yuntal becoming an IE becoming much more popular. Auto attack reliant scaling 80 carries have become much more prevalent in bot lane, and those champions are the champions that synergize the best with Braum, that I've always enjoyed playing the most with Braum, because they have a pretty chill, play safe farm play style, and then disengage in order to survive, and peeling them in team fights is absolutely unbeatable. And so if we look at, for example, the 80 carry meta, Braum synergizes really well with champions like Kai'Sa and Lucian and Ezreal and Jinx and Caitlyn and Sivir. He loves playing with these champions. Maybe not so much with Jhin, but that's about it. He loves playing with every single one of these 80 carry champions. Not so much with Smolder. Although, maybe, in my opinion, at least, I don't like playing with Smolder as Braum, but honestly, they could be okay together to keep him alive and get him to scale. I think Smolder's terrible, though, but we'll see. I'm surprised his win rate is 51%. But anyways, so we'll see. So what I mean by that is, well, we're nerfing Braum, and I agree that Braum should get a little bit of a nerf here. I actually said that in the last patch notes video, that Braum is performing really well, and when I was pointing out champions, I was surprised they weren't doing anything too. Even though I main Braum, I said I was a little bit surprised they weren't nerfing Braum already. One of the things that sucks about balancing the game is that when you see a champion like Braum rise to prominence like this, what often happens, and what I'm more concerned about than the nerf, is what happens afterwards. Because if eventually in the next couple of patches they address Yuntal and 80 carry itemization and change that all around again, and now all of a sudden Braum isn't as relevant, but he's also been hit with a nerf, if they forget about Braum and don't come back and give him his power back, then Braum just takes a permanent hit for no good reason, essentially, when they go and fix the 80 carry situation, or, the 80 carry meta changes or whatever. Braum's just left in the dust. This happens all the time. An item becomes broken. Rather than nerfing the item, they nerf the champions that are using it. Then they finally realize it was the item. They nerf the item. Then they forget to come back and give those champions their power back. They sit at a terrible win rate for a year or two, and then they realize, okay, we forgot about this champion. This champion's been doing bad for a while. Let's buff it up again. And I don't want that to happen to Braum, obviously, because he's my main champion. So one of the things that we should understand here is the effect that number of games played can have on win rate, even on champions overall. The effect that one tricks can have on a champion, and not just one tricks, but also the effect that new players can have on the champion. So for example, Nautilus is the go-to filled support champion in my opinion, especially in high elo, and as a result Nautilus has a lower win rate than normal. There's also champion difficulty, right? Nautilus as well is a more difficult champion. So champions like Lee Sin, Thresh, LeBlanc have always had a lower win rate because they're kind of difficult. Those aren't the best examples of champions, but let's say like Lee Sin for sure. Let's say Aphelios in AD carry, right? These champions tend to carry a lower win rate. Thresh and support tend to carry a lower win rate because they're difficult to play. So when we see Lee Sin sitting at they're super popular and super difficult to play. So with a large sample size that should push the win rate to 50%, and a large number of random new players playing it first time in ranked because it's a fun champion or because it's a popular champion, we would expect the win rate to naturally sit a little bit lower than 50%. So when Lee Sin's sitting at 50.8% win rate, Lee Sin's probably a little bit too strong. When Thresh is sitting at a 51.5% win rate, same concept, he's probably a little bit too strong. When Aphelios is sitting, well, Aphelios is okay. But when there's an argument to be made here, right? He's sitting right around 50%, but he's got 9%, 8 or 9% of games he's being picked. That's probably a little bit much, to be honest. Aphelios is the type of champion that's difficult to play and mained by a select few players, that he should probably have a lower pick rate and a higher win rate, if anything. Or something like that. Or maybe he should have a lower win rate if more people are picking him. Maybe he's around fine right now. If I think back to my opinion on the champion in solo queue or whatever, I don't think Aphelios is problematic in any way. But what I'm getting at here is that win rates differ a lot based on what percentage of the players are one-tricking them, whether they're a super popular champion or a super unpopular champion, whether people are likely to first time that champion because it's a fun, popular, go-to filled champion for that role, etc., etc. So for those reasons, champions' win rates are going to be all over the place, and balancing everything to 50% isn't necessarily accurate. Here you have like Katarina, for example. Katarina is usually a champion that sits at a lower pick rate among people who main the champion. She's a very one-tricked champion, right? But a higher win rate. The fact that her pick rate is 6% seems a little bit high to me. Her win rate seems fine to a little bit high. It's fine because 6% of people picking her is driving down the win rate a little bit. I would be more comfortable if Katarina was sitting at the same win rate, but a 4% or a 2% pick rate instead of 6%. But, maybe this is totally fine. I don't know. And her ban rate is a little bit high too, which maybe suggests that she's getting a little bit too out of control as well. So what I'm getting at there, and not diving too deep into any of these champions or anything like that. Again, I don't think Katarina's broken when I play against her in solo queue at all. But the idea there is there are all these factors that affect things. Riot used to understand from a balance perspective that you weren't going to get every champion to 50% because there were all these factors that were coming in and affecting things. When an easy champion like Nami, when an easy champion like Nami is picked as much as she is and has as high of a win rate as she does, there's a problem. So usually what we're looking at is not just the win rate, but we're thinking about, does this champion have a high win rate and it's being picked a lot and it's being banned a lot? And if a champion like Lulu has still a 51.5% win rate, is being picked the second most of any support, and has a 21% ban rate, you probably need to nerf Lulu again. If a champion like Nami that's not normally super popular and played by a niche set of players is all of the sudden the most popular support in the game, and despite having so many games that should push it to converge at a 50% win rate because there's so many new people coming to the champion, instead the champion's sitting at 52%, the champion probably needs nerfed. If a champion like Thresh, that's supposed to be one of the hardest champions in support to learn and to play, is sitting at the third most picked support champion in the game, and despite having a large player base and number of games, he's sitting at a 51.5% win rate, he probably needs nerfed because a champion like Thresh is naturally difficult and shouldn't have a 51% win rate for people who are playing him for the first time or who are newer to the champion. Karma, probably a little bit strong if she's the fourth most picked support, but I mean, her win rate's just okay. You would probably want to look at with Karma specifically, the difference between Enchanter Karma and remember how we talked about in this video, Karma's got two different builds, right? So maybe the case is that, Karma, when she's going heal and when she's building, Moonstone and Redemption and Dawncore, maybe this is much more broken than the AP build where with Dawncore, with the Enchanter build, you get to a 60.6% win rate. With Shirelia's, you get in the AP build, you're getting to a 58% win rate. When you max Q, you're getting to a 51% win rate. But when you max E and going the Enchanter build, you get to a 53% win rate. You can probably see here when you're going Comet, you have a 49.9% win rate. But when you're going the Enchanter build and going, Airy, you get a 51.6% win rate. So probably what's going on with Karma is that Karma is broken as an enchanter, or not broken, but like slightly more powerful than she should be as an enchanter, but her win rate is not as high as Lulu and Thresh and Nami because half of the players are playing the wrong build on the champion. So that would be something that's worth looking into and isolating. Nautilus is probably fine. Right, Nautilus is pretty popular, but he's always a pretty popular support champion. He's, again, that go-to field champion, and he has a slightly lower win rate than you would expect because he's that go-to field champion, and a lot of people playing him are new to the champion. He's also somewhat of a difficult champion to play. He's not as hard as Thresh, but he's definitely one of those hooked support champions that can be a little bit more difficult to learn, so we might expect a lower win rate on him. Milio is not a super popular support champion, so the fact that he's sitting at the sixth most popular support champion with the same pick rate basically as Nautilus is a concern. The fact that he's winning 52% of his games is a concern, and his ban rate's starting to creep up as well. Braum's kind of a medium difficulty champion, kind of easy. So again, a champion that's usually not as popular as Nami, Milio, and Braum are not usually this popular. So something's going on. Obviously, people are banning a lot of Braum, so they're frustrated playing against it and feel like it's not balanced. And then you have obviously a pretty high win rate on Braum as well, and the win rate's going up the more people that are playing it, not going down, and that's a big problem and concern. So obviously red flags with Braum. I know Braum's getting hit on the next patch, but you could probably hit every champion on this list here, Braum or above, out of the top 7 most picked support champions. Probably all of them need nerfed except Nautilus, to be honest. Maybe not Karma. Karma would be the second one I would say maybe doesn't need nerfed, but obviously you get what I'm getting at. Win rates are overrated. At the end of the day, in ranked, as a player, your win rate is always going to converge somewhere around 50%. The more you put in games on a champion, your champion's win rate is going to converge to around 50% because your champion's win rate ultimately is the same thing as your overall win rate in ranked if you were to play that one champion 100% of the time. So eventually, the more games you put in on a champion, the more it's going to converge at 50%. You're hoping for somewhere between a 50 to a 55% win rate. If a 55% win rate in the long run over 11,000 games is even possible, it may not be, but you're probably aiming over the long run. Like if you're playing 11,000 games, you're probably aiming for somewhere between 50 and 52 or 53%. And really the difference between that 50% and 53% is a player who's stuck and not improving at all. And a player at 53% is improving pretty rapidly because they're spending more time out of the game, studying the game rather than just playing it. So my experience, for example, at 51.5% is I spend a lot of time spamming games at not a high enough intensity where I'm watching YouTube in the background or I'm listening to stuff, listening to music, not paying a ton of attention to the game. And I'll go on bad periods like that. And then when I get serious about the game and start playing with high intensity again on my main champion, all of a sudden my win rate will shoot up because I'm putting that intensity and effort in, and I'll go back to my peak, when I'm putting in that effort. I also have periods of time where I got hard stuck and wasn't making improvement. And I don't spend a lot of time outside of the game, like VOD reviewing. I do more than I did in the past, but I don't spend a lot of time in practice tool. I don't spend a lot of time VOD reviewing, and I don't spend a lot of time studying the game outside of playing it. I do watch more YouTube content on getting better at League than I did in the past, and that's definitely been a part of it and helped a lot. But basically, what I'm getting at is that let's say you want to be that player with a long-term improvement rate of, 1 or 2 or 3%, 51, 52, 53% over the long run. In order to do that, you need to be spending more time learning League outside of the game, more watching champion spotlights, reading champion wikis, reading about items and stuff like that, items on the League wiki, watching YouTube content that helps you understand the game better and teaches you how to play better, spending time in practice tool and VOD reviewing your games. Somebody who did all of those things maybe would be capable. Imagine someone who VOD reviewed every single game that they played, who, for every hour that they spent in game, spent an hour outside of game studying. Maybe that player would be able to consistently win 55% of their games over the long run, but it would also take a lot of game time away from that person as well. So, it's a trade-off there. But, your long run win rate is probably going to be between, if you're improving, 51 and 53% or something like that. Don't beat yourself up about that. And your champion win rate on your main champion is probably going to approach that. And don't abandon your main champion just because your win rate is approaching the appropriate win rate and rank that it should be, because you're at a rank where you're stuck and you need to make improvement on your main champion to break through. Going to your second or your third or your 10th champion, or a champion you've never played before, when you're struggling with your main champion, is not a good solution, because it's not the champion that's the problem. It's that you need to improve on your main champion further to break through. When you're looking at players' win rates in solo queue games and things like that, don't expect a player with a 65% win rate to be a free win. A lot of times that player, at least at my rank, I guess, is peaked and starting to plateau, and isn't all that good or going to guarantee you a free win. In fact, a lot of times those players are a liability because they've slingshotted past where they should be in ranked and are actually worse than they should be. Sometimes a player on your team with a 49% win rate, who was much, much higher ranked before, if they're taking the game seriously and playing their main champion, is actually more likely to win you the game because they're underinflated from where they should be or could be. And has consistently proven that they've been able to do it. I would also take a player who has 800 games of experience over a player who has 100 games of experience. The player with 800 games of experience is probably a better player, to be honest, because they've practiced the game a lot more. Rank matters a lot more than win rate, and what matters when it comes to win rate is the context behind what led to that win rate being what it is. What champions were being played? What rank was it being played at? When it comes to items, don't run into pitfalls of assuming that items with the highest win rate are automatically the best, and don't assume that the items that are picked the most are necessarily the best. Although if you want to minimize, if you don't care about items and you want to focus on your gameplay and climbing, or you're new and you don't know how to make these tough decisions between pick rate and win rate, then you should probably just pick the ones that are most picked. But the items that are most picked, or the items with the highest win rate, aren't necessarily the best. Same thing with summoner spells and all this stuff. So data can be a helpful tool, but there's a lot of context that we need to have in order to know what's actually the best. Like, for example, are there two different builds on a champion and we're accidentally mixing two of them together? Is one item built in a situation where you're more likely to be winning? And it's good if you're building that in a situation where you're winning, but you shouldn't be building it in a situation where you're losing just because it has a higher win rate. There are situations like, I know on Riven, for example, sometimes people will build different items depending on whether they're going to team fight. You'll build like a death stance, and you'll be less likely to want to build death stance if you're not going to be team fighting, if you're going to be split pushing or playing for picks. So there are itemization decisions that you need to understand context for, like that. There are cost differences between items that will cause higher cost items to have a higher win rate because it means you have more gold, and therefore you're more likely to win the game. whereas there are others that aren't. Luckily, with things like support items, you don't have to worry about cost differences, and so it's easier to compare, et cetera, et cetera. And then when it comes to champion balance and things like that, Riot often makes the mistake of assuming that everything needs to be at a 50% win rate, and everything does not need to be at a 50% win rate. It is absolutely okay for Quinn mid to have a high win rate on one patch because, she has a very low player base, a very small number of games, and people happen to win a lot. That's okay. It's fine. But it's not okay if it's happening many, many patches in a row over a large sample size of games, despite new players coming into it. And as more people start to pick it and it starts to do well despite more people picking it and people who aren't even that familiar with the strategy, then it becomes a problem. So when we see champions that shouldn't be all that popular, like Nami and Milio and Braum, getting picked much more frequently than we would expect at a very, very high success rate on a very large number of games, and we see their ban rate starting to creep up, those are champions that we should be looking at nerfing, kind of regardless of the win rate, or at least win rate is only one portion or one piece of the decision-making process. There are champions where there are more one-tricks playing Katarina and Quinn than, or Riven, than there are playing champions like, Nautilus or, some of these other generic champions. So when we see that, we should know that maybe Katarina, as long as her pick rate is still low, because it's mostly one tricks playing it, can have that higher win rate, whereas champions that are more popular, like a Nautilus, can have a lower win rate, and that can be okay and doesn't mean that the champion's unbalanced. Same thing here with metas affecting certain champions. Sometimes nothing has caused a champion to become good at all, and no buffs to the champion, no nothing. It's just that the champion is good because of the meta or the items that exist in the game, like Braum being good because of Yuntal and IE being good on AD carries, or Nami and Lulu being good. Lulu's been nerfed like a million times, but Lulu's just good because maybe because of the meta, maybe because enchanter items are very strong. And so as a result, Lulu's performing very, very well and Braum's performing very, very well. But if you hit those champions and then change the enchanter items, or you change Yuntal and IE for AD carry, all of a sudden Braum and Lulu aren't performing as well. And so now all of a sudden Braum and Lulu aren't just average again, they're terrible because now you've hit two things that were making them good when you only needed to hit the one thing that was actually causing them to be good. And then they get forgotten for a year without being buffed, and then they end up terrible for a long time, and that sucks. So I hope that helps you guys understand win rate and put it into context a little bit more so that you can understand how to make these decisions and how to value win rate in terms of league. When I was picking my champion pool, one of the things that I ran into, I'll end it with this, is I'm looking at, these win rates and the number of games played. And what I started to realize is that I valued the number of games played and the amount of experience I had on a champion way more than I cared about this win rate number. Because to tell you the truth, I could have a champion here that has a 53% win rate. And I'd say to myself, yes, the champion has a 53% win rate, but I don't have a lot of games of experience on it. I'd probably rather play a champion that maybe I'm a little bit worse at in terms of win rate, but I have a much more experience on the champion, 100 games more experience on the champion. I'd much rather play this champion than I'd play this champion. And so what I started to realize when I was kind of valuing things is like win rate's important, but it's not the be all end all. And what is the context? So there's plenty of examples of that here. So Thresh is a champion that I have, it kind of stands out here. What is this? The top 9 champions or something like this. Out of the top 9 champions, 8 out of 9 have a 50% win rate or higher. At 292 games played or more, except for Thresh. Well, Thresh was a champion I played, if we go back, in Season 4 a lot. So let's go back to Season 4. I played 228 games on Thresh with a 48% win rate, went -8 games on Thresh. So that has kind of, not that that's the only bad season I had on Thresh, but that's half of my Thresh games, one of the most difficult to play support champions in the game. Half of my Thresh games that I put in were back in Season 4 when I was in Silver and terrible at the game. So that's obviously going to affect my Thresh win rate here in a very negative way. But all of the sudden, we start looking, and I go from 46.6% win rate to, well, how am I doing with Thresh since I got to Diamond? Well, I'm doing a lot better. Just since getting to Diamond, instead of that you saw just in Season 4, I was -8 games, I'm -10 since getting to Diamond. But I'm 47.1% win rate. And then look at this. Since getting to Masters, on Thresh, I'm 22-19. So I have a 53.7% win rate on 41 games played. So now all of a sudden, what we're looking at here is maybe I was terrible at Thresh when I was in Silver. But maybe knowing what I know now about the game, especially if I put some intention behind the way I was playing the champion, if I put some research into my build and stuff like that before I start picking it, maybe I wouldn't be that bad at Thresh, because 41 games it's not a huge sample size, but it's not nothing. And I'm 3 games positive on Thresh in a much better rank. How can that be that a champion I'm doing so terrible on in Silver is a champion that I'm now better on now that I'm in Masters after having not played much of it for years? Well, that's sort of an interesting conundrum, but it has more to do with me getting better as a player. And now that I approach Thresh, I'm approaching him the correct way, holding my abilities a lot longer, not spamming and missing Qs, but waiting for very easy opportunities when they're pinned against the wall, or when I can lead with Flay, or when my teammate CCs them first. And so I have a lot more opportunities to make use out of the champion because I know the game better now than I did when I was playing in Silver. And I'll never get away from these negative games that I had on Thresh in Silver unless I put a huge number of games in on Thresh now. I'll never get away from this, but contextualizing that makes it make a lot more sense. There's another champion here, Taric, who I have a very positive win rate on, but this was before Taric was reworked, and I don't have that many games on him, and it was also back when I was in Bronze in Season 3. So the thing is that if I play Taric today, I actually personally think I'm pretty decent at Taric. He's kind of Braum's long-lost twin champion. They're very similar Guardian or Warden type champions. So very similar play style to Braum. So I think I would be fine at Taric for that reason. But regardless, my win rate data and my games played even on Taric isn't that valuable to me because it's, the champion got reworked. Same thing we talked about with the Volibear and the Kale. So all of this stuff lacks serious, important context. And that's why your feeling for how good you are as a certain champion will often outweigh the data. That's where that comes into play. I know that in my head, I'm taking into account, well, how recently did I play this champion? Do I feel comfortable on this champion right now, or has it been 5 years since I played it? When we're looking at a data set like this that's old, has this champion been reworked or changed significantly from when I was playing it a lot? Those things make a significant difference. But even aside from that, like Thresh hasn't been changed a whole lot. Just the fact that I'm a better player now means that the experience that I have on Thresh is quite helpful. And now that I have the context of how to play the game better and how to throw skill shots better, all of a sudden I'm a much better Thresh player than I was before, despite this experience being a long time ago and despite the win rate being low. So hopefully that helps you guys understand this a little bit better. With that being said, as always, good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.